the longest and most grueling docu-series I've ever seen in my life. When I think of R. Kelly, I do think of him as the king of R&B, and I do think of him as the musical genius that they've all said he was, because he's written a lot of great songs, he's written a lot of good music, he's produced a lot of good music, he's put out a lot of good albums. But I'm gonna have to be honest and say that enough is enough with the sexual allegations and the sexual accusations of R. Kelly, because I believe that he's guilty. He's guilty because I believed even back in the early 2000s when he was being accused of having sex with a minor on tape. And I remember, even though I was in elementary school, I'm 24 years old. So since I was born in 94, in the early 2000s, when all of this started transpiring, I was a little girl. But I even remember the sex tape being talked about. I remember people making jokes about him peeing on people and peeing on the girl. I remember they would talk about it on 102 Jams, and they talked about it on TV and even in movies. And I remember even hair salons that I would go to, they would talk about it. And as a little girl, I knew what was going on, and I knew what he was about or whatnot. But at the time, I just really didn't fathom like how bad and how gruesome it was of him to be this sexual predator and to be this molester the way that he's really come out to be. Because at the time, like they said in the docu-series, the allegations came out, he was tried and put on trial. And I remember, even though I was a little girl, seeing the trial on TV playing out. He would come to trial and he would hear, the accusations and whatnot, and he eventually was found not guilty. And like they said in the docu-series, he released Trapped in the Closet. He released a slew of other music and put out hits and wrote music for different types of people. So to him, it was like, y'all said I did this, y'all said I did that. The court says I didn't do it, so since you can't try me again due to double jeopardy, I'm just going to move on with my life, put out some music, and forget about it all. And that's exactly what he did. And it seems like a lot of other people at the time, they did the same thing too. Now, back then, it would have been easy to think, well, maybe they are lying. Well, maybe they aren't telling the truth. Or maybe these women are trying to look for attention and fame and fortune. But through the years, and I want to even say before this docu-series came out, and before the stories about his sex cult came out, I remember there was a story that came out about a woman's husband who was suing R. Kelly. He said that he was suing R. Kelly because his wife at the time was a big R. Kelly fan. She would always go to his concerts, she would always listen to his music and everything. And then he realized how his wife started to become really close with R. Kelly. I don't really remember the story as vivid as this docu-series is, but I think it went along the lines of she met R. Kelly at a concert, they started talking, they developed some type of relationship, and they stayed in contact. And the wife lived in one particular city, I can't remember what city it was, and she encouraged her husband to move to Atlanta, where I believe R. Kelly was living at the time, so she could be closer to him to continue the affair. The husband, who was a sheriff with the police department or a police officer with the police department, he picked up his entire life and their house and moved down to Atlanta unknowingly so that his wife could be closer to R. Kelly. Eventually, he found out they were having an affair. Eventually, he found out the reason why his wife wanted to move to Atlanta so bad, and he sued R. Kelly for emotional distress, loss of wages due to him picking a new job, having to pick up his life and move to Atlanta so his wife could be closer to the singer, amongst other things. So that kind of raised a red flag with me when that story came out. And then after that story came out, you had the sex cult stories coming out. And since the sex cult stories have come out, now you have the docu-series. When the docu-series opened up in the first episode, of course, they talked about Aaliyah. The whole first episode was just focused on Aaliyah and Sparkle and Sparkle's niece. I remember when Aaliyah first came out. Now, Aaliyah came out in the early mid 1990s, and she was perpetrated as this sexy tomboy that, she was cool with the girls and cool with the boys too, but she had this swag about her where she could really sing, she could really hang, and she could really flow. And R. Kelly was, always in the videos, his voice was always on the track, and you could tell that they were really close. Now, I remember that when Aaliyah passed away, they did a behind the music on VH1 about Aaliyah, and they touched on her relationship between R. Kelly, but the only thing they really talked about was how she formed a relationship with R. Kelly, how they were really close in the studio, and how they worked together on music. And they touched on them getting married and everybody talking about it, and how Leah, whenever she was asked about it in interviews, she would never answer any questions about the marriage and about the annulment. And she just pretty much, brushed over it, glossed over it, didn't answer any questions about it. And then eventually just went away. And then once they were done with her marriage between her and R. Kelly and the annulment, I believe it was 2 months or 2 years after they got married, she forgot about it. She sang, she toured, she did concerts, put out One in a Million and Aaliyah, and then she passed away in a plane crash back in 2001. And the only thing, well, not the only thing, one of the things I want to say from seeing part one and part two of episode one is what type of parenting did Aaliyah and Sparkle's niece have? Because I remember as a child being told by my mom at an early age that if somebody touches you inappropriately, or never let somebody touch your breast, your cuckoo, coochie, whatever people want to call it, your butt, or anything, because that's your body. You shouldn't let anybody disrespect your body, penetrate your body, humiliate your body, or degrade your body in any way, shape, or form. And I'm sure that many parents should teach their children to not let people play with their bodies, sexually molest their bodies, sexually touch their bodies inappropriately and without consent, and to teach them healthy relationships between an adult and a child, and how an adult should not be sexually seeking after a child, and how they shouldn't receive that if it's presented to them. Because Aaliyah, now I was an Aaliyah fan, and I still love her music. Now, Aaliyah, to me, she came off as a really smart girl, and it was even told that she was a smart girl because while she was singing, she still attended school. Her teachers, admired her. She was an excellent student. I believe she even had a 4.0 GPA when she graduated from high school. And so Aaliyah, she was very creative, very talented, and very smart. So why would somebody who's that smart, who's that talented, let themselves fall into a situation with a man where they're being molested, they're being mentally manipulated, and they're just being taken advantage of? Now, my thought of that is she was either scared or she felt like this is what she had to do in order to keep her career going and in order to make it big in show business, because unfortunately she's not the only child star who's been taken advantage of by an adult. We've seen it with Gary Coleman, we've seen it with Todd Bridges, we've seen it with the Coreys. I mean, we've heard of this story time and time and again where child stars from the 80s or even the 70s, 80s, and 90s became really big stars. They were really famous, really popular for who they were and the image they portrayed. But later on in life, we learned that they suffered a lot of abuse by the hands of their parents, executive directors, producers, and a lot of other adults that they looked up to for guidance in the entertainment industry. And we even, well, I'm not going to touch on that part just yet up until I get along further in the docu-series. And so the thing with Aaliyah, I just don't see it as something that's not unfamiliar, because we've seen this story before about young girls and young men being taken advantage of in the industry and them accepting it and taking it because they're scared to speak out of repercussions of losing their career, losing friends, or losing family, and feeling the need that they have to go along to get along in order to succeed. And moving along to Sparkle and her niece that was sexually molested by R. Kelly and was the one in the sex tape that R. Kelly was accused of having in his child pornography case. With Sparkle, I feel like I want to say that I feel for her, and in a halfway I don't, because I'm sure she had good intentions for her niece when she introduced her to R. Kelly. But then again, you knew how he was. You knew about the marriage that he had with Aaliyah. You knew about their relationship prior to the relationship he developed with your niece. And she even talked about how she noticed some of the habits and tactics that he had in front of her with his own wife. And so, well, not even with his wife, because this was before he was married, with the first girl who was 14 years old. She was one of the first girls that was interviewed. And she even saw how he was with her. So I'm like, if you see that this man is acting strange, acting weird, he has premeditated actions that he has obviously practiced and has ingrained in himself to do in order to keep his victims trained, why would you introduce your niece to someone like that? And one of the things that I noticed about him was that he had a type that he went after. I noticed that he went after mainly black girls, with the exception of the one Hispanic girl he went after. They were usually underage, between the ages of 12 to 18. They were slim, pretty, and if they weren't girls who just fell into his trap, there were girls that had some type of potential. Now, Aaliyah, glad enough, she was able to escape that and land in the arms of Missy Elliott and Timbaland. But it seems like with Sparkle's niece and with the girl, not with, I believe it was with the Savage girl that's being talked about in the episode that's airing now, and even with another girl that he had made a victim, where they wanted to be big stars, big celebrities, and to really put their talent out there on the forefront. He just swept that under the rug and dumped it out the window and just flat out took advantage of them. And I want to say that out of this whole scenario of the sexual allegations that have come against R. Kelly, is that it's not only sad and disheartening, but it really lets you know what type of world we live in. Because it's not just with R. Kelly, we're seeing it with a lot of other big time celebrities being accused of sexually assaulting women. Bill Cosby, Matt Lowry, now AJ from AJ and Free on 106 and Park has had sexual allegations come out against him for sexually abusing or sexually assaulting a woman. So it's not like this is unfamiliar to us, but it's just really amazing how there has been so much sexual abuse and so much mental manipulation and so much play on the heartstrings of women, that there's been such a slew of sexual abuse and sexual assault and manipulation amongst women. And it not only has me thinking about how screwed up our judicial system is, but it also has me thinking about the sexual education that our society is not getting. Because what I've picked up on is that societies that are sexually oppressed, they tend to experience a lot of rape, a lot of sexual abuse, and a lot of mental manipulation within women. And the reason why I say that is because we've seen this in a couple of other societies other than the American society. When it comes to the American society, our society was very hushed on sex in the beginning. You know, you had TV shows that never talked about sex. They never showed women that were pregnant. If there was a scene between a man and a wife, they slept in separate beds. They never showed any type of public affection or sex with men and women in the early ages of American society up until I want to say the 70s and 80s, when you got into like black exploitation films and scary movies, and we started to become more liberal. But even though we're more liberal in our society, I believe there's still some type of sexual oppression going on, because it doesn't make sense how so many men that are being accused of sexual abuse, they can't keep the dingling in their pants. You know, do you have to have sex all the time? Do you have to whip it out all the time? Do you have to touch a boob, grab a cooch, all the time? Like what like what is going on with that? Like why is this such a redundant and common thing? And then it had me thinking that there was a story that came out about a woman in India that was gang raped. And I remember these four men, they gang raped her when she was on a bus. And there was a friend of hers that was there and they attacked her and the friend. The friend was beaten up pretty bad, but he escaped and he lived. And I remember they raped a woman with a metal rod and she ended up dying. And then not too long after that, a lot of women came out saying that sexual abuse and sexual assault is very common in India because I've read and even heard of stories of women getting on the buses and caravans in India where they're really packed, and I've seen them really packed where it looks like people are plastered all over the buses, and women have been groped, touched, or poked, or even fondled openly on these buses. And when you think about it, India's society is very sexually oppressed. They are predominantly Hindu, and if not Hindu, they're Muslim or Jain. And these religions, they put out this image of being very chaste, being very modest, and being very religious. And any type of public affection is not celebrated and it's not welcome. Then you have in the Middle East, public affection is not celebrated. The interaction between single women and single men is very segregated, where you can go to malls or restaurants and there will be veils closing single men off from married women and their families. And I remember that even in one Middle Eastern country not too long ago, they made it a law where husbands can rape their women. They can rape their wives if they refuse to have sex with them. And it has me thinking that sex education really needs to be taught because it's obvious that there's not enough of healthy sexual relationships being taught, where people are not being told that a child shouldn't be sexually idolized. They shouldn't be sexually gratified because a child, I mean, they're learning their ABCs, one, two, threes, how to tie their shoes, how to eat on their own, how to hold themselves up. So why would you introduce something so mature and something so drastic to someone as young as 6, 7, and 8 years old? And then this is why they have these inadequate feelings of, am I pretty? Am I cute? Why does my body feel this way? And then they go on acting these things out amongst other people as a way of getting back at their abusers, trying to screw these nasty and dirty feelings out of themselves, not even knowing that they're turning themselves into the people that did this to them. And not only is that not being taught, but they're also not being taught the difference between consent and coercion. Because I'm not sure if the men in these scenarios are dealing with women that have been taught to just not give away to sex or give away to sexual attention or whatnot. But it needs to be taught that sex should be not only consensual, but it should be a choice. It should be a thought. It should be something that's seen as something that's not nasty or vile or vulgar or anything like that. But it just really, it should be taught that it's a natural thing. But even though it's a natural thing, it needs to be taught that there are boundaries with sex, that children shouldn't be introduced to sex until they're fully aware of who they are, what they're about, and what they want, and given the option of choosing to have sex or not. And plus, people should be taught that you can have sex and you can have an exploratory sexual life, but just do it with people that want that consent. And I feel like this comes from a lot of narrow mindedness that people have about sex sometimes, and a lot of narrow mindedness that people have about consensual sex is that everybody in this world is not married, everybody in this world is not wholly saved, sanctified, and everybody's not underage. There are over 7 billion people that live in this world, and you can find somebody who will willfully and consensually have sex with you where you won't have to deal with sexual allegations and accusations and rape out charges and going to trial and being held up on these different things. And so I feel like that's something that really needs to be explored by a lot of different societies. And if people don't want to have sex before marriage or have sex at all, that's their choice. But if people do want to have sex, that's their choice too. But it needs to be taught and it really needs to be ingrained that having a healthy relationship with sex is what's needed, and that introducing sex at the appropriate ages is needed, but also sex like about pregnancy, I mean, information about pregnancy and STDs and STIs, that should be taught too, because I've noticed that when people aren't allowed to express themselves in a healthy way, and when people aren't taught to express themselves in a healthy way, whether that be with self esteem, sexuality, self image, identity, they tend to rebel. And when they rebel, it usually ends up in some type of traumatic event. It ends up in some type of abusive situation or some type of oppression or controlling situation where a person has to eventually work their way out and counsel their way out of being a better person and being a healthier person and being a more sane person about what's going on in their lives, how they can change that, and how they could live forward, move forward, and be a better person. Now, another thing that I want to touch on in this docuseries is that it was mentioned that R. Kelly was sexually molested along with his brother by a family member. Not just one family member, but possibly another family member. The thing I've noticed is that when people are sexually molested as children, and it's something that's introduced to them time and time again, they eventually have it ingrained in them that this is what an adult is supposed to do to a child who looks this way, acts this way, talks that way, or behaves that way. We only know the tip of the sexual abuse that went on in R. Kelly and his younger brother's life, because his brother R.Kelly did say that the same thing happened to him too. The only thing we know is what they told them, but we don't know the extent of the sexual abuse that went on in their home. And I believe that the sexual abuse that went on in their lives was drastic. For R. Kelly to just be such a bona fide, blatant rapist and molester and pedophile like this. Because I've learned that when people are hurt, they like to say, hurt people hurt people. And since R. Kelly and his brother, and who knows, his brother that was in jail may have had the same thing done to him and could have possibly done it to his other brothers, because it's been a known fact. And we've also seen it with other families and famous people that when sex is introduced to you in an inappropriate way as a child, especially by a family member or a friend, you first feel inadequate about what's going on. Your Sometimes you feel shamed or guilty and whatnot, but then eventually you get into it and you start liking it. But not only do you get into it and start liking it, the person that's doing this to you could start doing it to other people, so that you won't be the only one that has that story. And so it's like they want to build this abuse pact, or they want to build this abuse mechanism within the house or within the group or within a family in order to have everybody covering each other, because it's like they don't want one person saying that, oh, you did this to me, you touched me inappropriately. They want to have a group or a pact of people doing it, so that one person won't feel better than the other. One person won't feel like, oh, well, I'm perfect and I'm better than y'all because I didn't do it. And that way there can be this inclusion and this collectivism within that, so nobody will stand out. But also so the person that's doing it won't get caught. And with R. Kelly, it's not a surprise that he's become a predator or an abuser, because, like I said before, hurt people. And since he was taught this by the people that did this to them, he did it to other people. And we've not only seen this with R. Kelly, but we've seen it with other rapists too. And if not with rapists, we've seen it with other entertainers. Because Donnie McClurkin comes to my mind, the gospel singer. To those of you who don't know his story, he was sexually abused as a child, because when his younger brother died, who was two, the story goes that he was playing in the yard as a child, and the ball had rolled into the street, and a car came by. He went after the ball, and the car ended up hitting him and killing him. And on the night of his funeral, Donnie McClurkin said that's when his uncle started raping him. And the rape lasted from the age of 7 up until 13. But not only did the abuse stop from his uncle, it started with his cousin that was the son of the uncle that had raped him. So since you've seen that repeat of the abuse that he went through with his uncle, with his son, it's obvious that his son may have been raped or may have taken part in his rape that went on with him as a child. And I read the story about R. Kelly revealing that in his interview, and how he didn't want to throw his family members under the bus, and how he didn't want to tell on anybody. And I'm not sure if Donna McClurkin went through the same thing. Unfortunately, within the black community, we have a problem with being honest with ourselves and honest about our families and really holding our family members accountable. We've seen it especially with Iyanla Van Zant. Now, Iyanla Van Zant, she does an excellent job digging deep, especially when it comes to black people and the black family, about the day to day struggles we go through mentally and emotionally. But it's one of those ugly faces that we like to hide behind smiles and good food and good cheer and good music, and the jolly family members and stuff we're around, but at the same time we're hurting each other. A lot of us have suffered mentally and emotionally and physically because of our mothers somehow abusing us because they were abused by our fathers or their mothers or their fathers. Getting abused by family members because they were abused by another family member. Getting hurt by another family member because that's their way of showing love and consideration and whatnot. And when you think about it, Tyler Perry, I want to say, was the one that brought a lot of this stuff to the forefront because he was one of the first black playwrights to talk about incest within the black family, to talk about low self esteem and poor, body image and, single parenthood and things like that. When at the time, especially in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the early 2000s, black people did not talk about incest. We didn't talk about incest. We didn't talk about abuse, depression, domestic violence, none of that. We were pretty much taught that those were white people problems. That we were strong, we were conquerors, we were more than enough, and we just didn't do stuff like that. And if we did, we would say, "Oh, you need to quit lying. Girl, he didn't do nothing to you." Or, "Boy, she wouldn't do nothing like to you. Why you lying?" Or, "That's Uncle so and so and cousin so and so." And we take up for people we know are doing wrong by affiliation because we've had it ingrained in us for so long. And I believe this does come from slavery, that your own kind would never do something to you because the man or the oppressor is doing enough to us. So why would we do that to ourselves? And that was something that I noticed with R. Kelly. And I just, the only thing I could say about R. Kelly is that he's a good singer and a good entertainer, but he's guilty as sin. He is. To me, it doesn't matter if he was acquitted of all charges, you know, of the allegations that came out of him. I mean, Michael Jackson, for crying out loud, was brought up on child abuse charges and stuff like that, but he was still bringing in little kids in his bed and sleeping with them and whatnot. And it's just, he's guilty. He did it. And the reason why they can't try him again because of double jeopardy. But I'm sure that with the stuff we're seeing in this docuseries, they can try him for something. They can. And the only thing I could say that I hope is that justice is served for the people that suffer the abuse by R. Kelly. And I really do hope that R. Kelly gets the help that he needs because he's a very depraved man. He is, and it's obvious that he has suffered some type of excruciating abuse where that has been his persona, to be an abuser and to be a pedophile and to be a predator. So I just hope that justice is served for him and that he gets the help that he needs. But I hope that he also pays for what he's done to all those women. Because even though some of those women asked for it, and I'm going to get into that a little bit, even though some of those women walked into those scenarios knowing how he was, they still didn't deserve to be treated like that and to go through what he did to them. Now, moving down the line, and this will be the last part of my video before I close, is that there needs to be a lot of people held accountable for what was done. He strategically, and when I say he, R. Kelly strategically made it so he could abuse these girls. You have the dancers not being able to talk to the background singers. Background singers can't talk to the vocalists. Vocalists can't talk to the instrument players. Instrument players can't talk to the entertainers in the venues. It's like he's keeping everybody separated and segregated so that no one is seeing or knowing what he's doing. And if anybody does see or know what he's doing, they're from a circle that he knows and that he can manipulate and get to cover up his mess. And I feel like not only should R. Kelly be held accountable and charged for the crimes that he's done, but I feel like the former employee that's been sitting in the confessional with, with the lights and stuff turned off and his voice disfigured so he can't figure out who he is, he should be charged. The tour manager should be charged. I mean, a lot of these adults, and I even believe the parents included of the older girls should have some type of legal obligations put against them because you people were grown adults and this man was sexually abusing children and y'all knew it and y'all did nothing about it. Y'all even protected this man. Y'all even moved around this man's wife and his children just to protect this man as to what he was doing. And it's just so unfathomable to me how these people can just be so for R. Kelly, and these are grown adults. I mean, I'm sure these people were probably afraid of repercussions of speaking out. They were afraid of losing their jobs, losing money, but I'm like, y'all people gonna still have y'all degrees. You'll still have your integrity, and you can find another job and another celebrity that's not down or agree with none of that stuff. Because I believe there's a party for everybody. If the party you going to or you're into is not down with you and not accepting you, you could probably find another party across town, across state, across city, across country that speaks your language and is down with what you're about. And I'm sure these people they could have did that. Of course, it may not have been. It probably wouldn't have been easy, but I mean, you guys might as well be predators yourselves. You're protecting a man who's molesting children. And then another thing that I want to say is that some of the girls, they did know who he was. And I want to say the later girls, the ones that came into the picture in the late 2000s up until the 2000 teens, especially the girl who spoke to R. Kelly when he was on trial for the sex tape. I'm like, you're 14 years old, you're his type, you're a young girl, you're the type of girls that he's been sexually molesting and sexually manipulating, and you're talking to this man as if he's a childhood friend on the playground or walking through the hallway at school. And then for her to even say that her mom was a single parent and her mom always worked and wasn't around and she was able to get out so freely, it really speaks to the parenting again. Because it's like you guys let this man keep you away from your daughters for years, months, him changing telephone numbers, him not allowing them to talk to their parents, not allowing them to see their parents. I'm like, why didn't you guys call the police and try to make up a missing person? Or try even if they weren't missing, try something to get in touch with your daughters. And so I feel like, in a way, even the parents didn't halfway care because I mean, how can you let your teenage daughter go with a grown man, let alone that within itself, but not even do research and think of the allegations and the charges that have been brought against this man to even let your daughter breathe in the same space as this man? So I feel like that girl who was talking to him while he was on trial and whatnot, she asked for that. Cause I'm like, you saw the headlines, you saw the stories, you heard things, everything. So why would you even want to test that and walk into that and experience that for yourself and son? And then he talked about her getting another girl involved where she found this girl on MySpace and they had a mutual liking to R. Kelly amongst other things and they became friends and she became like a slave in the house that she was at. And she talked about how they would try to meet up and socialize and they would never meet or never even see each other in the house. And how could she not know that based on R. Kelly's past history with these young girls, he would want other girls that he was with to bring in more girls for them to be in a sexual escapade with them? Because we saw it with the first girl who was 14 years old and stayed with him till she was, what, 17, 18 years old, talking about the threesomes they would have on tape of when she would bring in other girls or when he would bring in another girl to have sex with. So I'm like, how can you not even think of that being the reason why he wants you with this young girl, in the house? And then I also really like how her mother, and this is the girl, not the savage girl, but she was friends with the 14-year-old girl she was from MySpace. I really loved how her mother fought until she finally found her daughter in the hotel room that R. Kelly probably confined her to, hugged her, kissed her, cried, everything, and connected to her. Now that's something that a mother should do. Like, if you really love your child, you would fight to get your child out of there. She even called R. Kelly when her daughter was still a teen, and she even told him over the phone to not be talking to her daughter, to stay away from her daughter. And I felt like that's what the other parents should have done. And I'm sure if they would have did that, their daughters probably would not have suffered as much if they got there in time, or their daughters wouldn't have even been one of the girls on R. Kelly's scorecard. So to close out this review that I'm giving of this docu-series, I really want to say that this is a lot that's coming out. It's a lot that's being heard, and it's a lot that's being foretold. But it really says a lot about our society and who we are as a people. It's like we see the news stories of people being taken advantage of, being hurt, being molested, raped, kidnapped, abused, and we're the main ones sitting at the dinner table or sitting in our chairs in the office or in the lobby or in the living room saying, that's a shame, that don't make no sense, why didn't they do this and why didn't they do that? And we're people who go to work, or we're living with people, or are married to people, or we hear about people who are dealing with the stuff that's in the news, and we won't do nothing about it. We won't report it to any police. We won't report it to any type of authoritarian figure other than the police. We won't even reach out to the person that's dealing with that type of abuse or sufferance. We'll just, say, it ain't my business. Well, I ain't got to deal with it. Or, I don't want to get involved in that. But if you don't want to get involved, and if it's not your business, then you can't complain about that same type of business that you're seeing on the news. Because I think the thing is with our society is that when we see things on the news, we equate it to fiction. Because we're so used to watching reality TV, sitcoms, and comedy shows that we're even starting to believe that real news, like Donald Trump says, is fake news. And that there's no way that this stuff can be happening, and we're not even seeing how this stuff is happening. And the reason why it's news is because no one is doing anything about it, and the victims have no choice but to speak out about it in order to stop the abuse. So I hope you all enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment in the comment section. Have a good day.